Impact Interview is sponsored by the Pocono Mountains, where small town charm meets big adventures. Book your trip today by visiting PoconoMountains.com.
Well, welcome back to Nittany Game Week. It's time for our Impact Interview, and this week's guest is another of an outstanding student athlete and a long history of great Nittany Lions players, although this one was quite the two-way player in his day. He entered Penn State in the spring semester of 2005, part of a class that sparked a rebirth of Penn State football. After the 2007 season, Justin King entered the NFL draft, where he was selected by the St. Louis Rams, spent several years in the NFL, and he joins us now. Justin, thanks so much for the time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be on.
All right, so you had a really famous kind of recruiting story, because it wasn't just you, it was you and Derek Williams kind of grouped together, two of the top 10 players in the country. And as I mentioned, you guys kind of sparked that rebirth. So talk about the recruiting process for you guys and what motivated you at that point in your life to decide on Penn State?
Well, man, that's a very interesting story. I mean, it was a nice recruiting process. I'll start with just even the first time that me and Derek met each other. We actually met for the first time at a Penn State Nike camp, where back in the day where they did the Nike camps and invitationals, it was actually at Penn State. And Derek stuck out to me just in somebody's competitiveness. So we ended up connecting there. But to fall back to when I first got my offer at Penn State, obviously I was coming up to Penn State pretty often with my dad and going to the games. And so I met Scrap when I was like 7th or 8th grade, and understanding the landscape of Penn State football and what the atmosphere of college football was. So like that was like my intro to what college sports was. So when I first got my offer from Penn State, obviously Scrap did a great job recruiting me. He was consistent the whole way through. But what really motivated me to go to Penn State throughout the whole time was really the consistency, like the respectability that they had throughout the recruiting process, and how they recruited from like a place, I don't say a place of power, but like from a place of respect, from respect for themselves. I mean, it was at the time where there was some down years at Penn State. They had some struggles, but just according to how everyone else was recruiting me, like 55 offers across the country, they were consistent in where they stood, regardless of how they moved. So that really was something that stuck out to me. And obviously, Scrap echoed all the consistency throughout the recruiting process. And when it came down to making my decision, I had to ask myself, like, who do I trust and who do I respect? And it was glaringly Penn State at the end of the day. So I ended up calling Scrap and joked a little bit that I was going to go somewhere else. And then I was like, all right, I'm coming to Penn State.
Scrap probably had heart medication going when he said that. So Justin, a lot of people, Travis Hunter at Colorado is getting a lot of attention because he's a two-way player. A lot of people forget you were a two-way player when you came to Penn State. So forget Tom Bradley's here for a minute. You played some wide receiver, you returned kicks, you got reverses, you even lined up at running back when you were on the good side of the ball with us. But so forget Tom's here for a minute, and just tell us all how much more fun it was when you came over to the offensive side of the ball and got the ball in your hand than it was playing defense for those stiffs over there.
I will say it was fun. My first snaps at Penn State were actually on the offensive side of the ball, whether it was like in the spring and coming into the first game, getting in against South Florida. But it was very exciting having, playing with Mike Robb, playing with Derek, Jordan, and Dion. We were all roommates, so all of us getting a chance to prepare and get ready to jump on the field. There were some moments when I played defense in practice where it was like, oh, he's the traitor, right? So like when I was on offense, it was like I was one of the guys. So it was extremely exciting, and it was very it was one of the confirmations for myself throughout the recruiting process, because Joe and Scrap were telling me that I had the ability to play both sides of the ball. So for it to happen, and they were giving me plans. We talked previously before we got on camera about Joe's letters not being so short, but they were detailing a plan for me to play both sides and how to do it. And that was one of the major things that separated them from the rest of the schools, where it was like actual details of like, hey, this is the plan that we have for you. This is the value that we can provide for you. And this is the value you can provide for us. So just the honesty throughout the whole recruiting process, and to get there in the spring and start seeing the plan implemented was very satisfying and encouraging to me. So it was always happy to play, on the offensive side of the ball, because that was the one question mark that we see like, hey, will that really happen? So, everything on defense was defense. I knew that was going to come along.
Justin, I think I spent so much time recruiting you, they thought I was on the faculty at Gateway High School. But you know, the one thing is, as you look at some of Penn State's best players in the NFL right now, many of them played high school football in Pennsylvania. As a guy who was a product of Western Pennsylvania high school football, how much did it mean to you to stay in state and play at Penn State?
It was essential. I mean, I think you don't really understand it. And even going back to the recruiting process, how everyone operates, the way, coming up in Pittsburgh, it's a blue collar town. And just coming across, like I would say, quote unquote, nice people or like overtly nice people is rare. So getting recruited throughout the recruiting process and everybody just coming with the glitz and glamour and just kind of fake niceness throughout the process and being recruited by Penn State, that was just kind of like business approach. This is how we operate. It reminded me of how Pittsburgh operated. So the culture that I grew up in Pittsburgh and seeing guys like the years prior to me, like A.Q. Shipley, Paul Postlesny, I knew Morelli was coming up there. And so I knew that there was talent that was actually coming to Penn State. So, I mean, I think there's a pride and a cross-reference of toughness that happens in Pittsburgh and State College and the cultures that mirror one another.
Hang with us for a minute. We're going to step aside for the TV show to take a break. We're going to continue our interview. So if you want to see the entire conversation with Justin King, make sure to go to NittanyGameWeek.com for the entire interview along with other web exclusive content.